Today we're joined by David Duffett. David comes with 20 years experience coaching technical presenters, pre-sales engineers, telecom experts, IT teams, plenty of people, and also the creator of the 7 Power Presenting Protocols, which I'm really interested to hear more about as someone who presents myself. And you're also a specialist, I understand, in helping some pre-sales teams win more business and seeing how they can improve and deliver their presentation skills. Is that right? See,
Yes,
I've missed
that's
anything?
a very reasonable summary, Sarah. Thank you.
Good. Um, I think that this is something I definitely see and hear a lot about as well in the role that I do here at Curo. And a lot of customers who talk to me about their teams. There's a big difference between knowing your stuff and then be able to communicate that, especially with some clarity and confidence. It's a different set of skills. So I'm really
Yes,
interested to hear about it a little bit more.
yeah. It was. You said that phrase, knowing your stuff. I love to say knowing your stuff, and then later I say knowing your stuff is not enough. It's the ability to communicate the relevant part of your stuff, not all of your stuff, because technical people sometimes like to unload everything, don't they? Rather than the
Yeah,
relevant bit of your stuff. And of course, communicating it in a way that the receiving people can resonate with, receive, understand, implement, all of those things. Sorry, I just wanted to
yeah.
jump in on that particular phrase.
No, that's fine. I think your work centers on helping technical professionals communicate. And why is it, do you think, that so like they can be an absolute worldie of an engineer or a technical person, but sometimes struggle to get their message across when it comes to this style of delivery? Why do you think that is?
I think it's because the focus has been, in their whole lives, the focus has been round the technical piece. I'm making an assumption that most people in pre-sales and other engineers are focused on the technical side. And so here's what I don't buy. I don't buy this thing that all engineers are introverts and they don't like talking to people. My thesis, if you like, is that technical people have gone to college and they've pumped this technical muscle, or they've gone to university, they've pumped this technical muscle, they've got into a technical job, they've pumped this technical muscle, they've been given product training, and they've never pumped this muscle very much. They've got it, but they haven't really sort of been using it specifically or paying any attention to it. And in fact, one of the pictures that I show is like a guy holding up both muscles, where one is much noticeably bigger than the other. And so, what I say to people is, you've got the skills and abilities, and if you want to be a great communicator, a captivating communicator, and a powerful presenter, it's possible. Do you remember back in the days when we'd go into shops and buy software updates and things, and when you turned the box round, it'd say minimum system requirement, Pentium P3, and 4 gigs of RAM or whatever it is. Well, I have a sort of a pretend box, and it says Geek Communication Skills Upgrade or Comms Upgrade, and when you flip it round on the back, it says minimum system requirement, Desire. If you want it, you'll be able to do it. If you don't want to do it, fair enough. Stay in that at that corner of the office where the curtains are closed and keep coding, then that's fine. But if you'd
Yeah.
like to get up there and communicate better with people, if you really want to do that, then I can help.
So desire is almost like one of the biggest things then. It's one of the biggest factors into making sure that that person is a success in the presentation and then
Yes,
for themselves as well, feeling the success.
yeah, and for a while they may not have had that desire at all. But what classically happens, not in every case, but stereotypically, if you like, in the pre-sales world, is people find their way into a pre-sales engineer position because they know the product or they know the service or whatever it is so well. And so they're drafted in. They might have come from tech support. They might have been doing different jobs where they got to know it really well, and so they get into this role, and now they're paired up with somebody from the sales team, and they find that they know all of the ins and outs of the product, but they're not as equipped as they could be or should be to have those more sort of commercial conversations, or indeed interact with the salespeople who are, again, stereotypically different types of people to what engineers are. And so there's room for dysfunctional relationships if we're not careful in that
Yeah,
doing that.
and customers, well, customers, I say customers because what we find is that we'll often speak to one of our customers and they'll say, "Oh, I need someone who can do this, 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 and this," but they must have pre-sales experience, or
Mm.
they must be comfortable with doing pre-sales. So there's a kind of expectation sometimes, isn't there? I think that people just assume that that's what, just because they're very, like you say, very technically capable, that they must be, we must want them to do some pre-sales as well. So do you think there's like a gap maybe in some businesses for how they get their technically capable people to
Yes, I
do
think,
pre-sales?
yeah, I really think there is, Sarah. And there are people that do it very well, but these are like unicorns
Yeah.
who somehow naturally have the ability to both get into the technical detail that they need to and to communicate it to a wider audience. Of course, generally engineers are really good at communicating with other engineers because there's like a shared respect and an understanding of their technical prowess. But of course, when it comes to communicating with the people that hold the purse strings, the CFO or various other people, it can be that can be a difficult challenge. And as you're saying, there is a gap because unless an organisation is totally focused on delivering the best pre-sales person, when they go on their away days and their company offsites, it's product updates, it's this, it's that. There might be something for the sales team, but there's generally not something for the pre-sales people in terms of being more effective communicators.
Yeah, it's almost like that whole academic and creative. We can't be both, but you almost need to be for this particular role.
Yes, it's a hybrid role where both skills are needed. Now, although I started off focusing on presentation skills, I soon realised that the reason why technical people struggled sometimes with their presentations was actually a deeper issue about communication skills in general. And
Yeah.
that was affecting the way they showed up at work and their working relationships. So it wasn't just about being out there in front of a room full of people or on the conference stage. It was actually the day to day where their communication skills could really help them.
Yeah, and it's just fundamentally a change as well, isn't it, in what they know and what they do. And I recorded another podcast yesterday with a change leader who specifically spoke about this whole human element of how someone's going to receive the information. How do you,
Right.
what some people may receive it as is not how other people would process it and take the information in. So you've got to consider so many different factors as well in those and how that information they're delivering is going to be absorbed.
Yes, very much so. The point I was going to make there is that when you think, well, self awareness is not always at the highest levels with technical people.
No.
And that's where it starts. It starts with, well, what kind of a person am I, and how do I like to do things, and how do I like to transmit information? And then to your point about the podcast you were doing yesterday, the next thought process is how do other people like to receive information? And I need to be careful that I don't accidentally give my favourite way of doing it. And what I do is research the audience and find out their favourite way and do it their way.
Yeah.
And in fact, you talked about the seven power presenting protocols. Protocol number 3 is preference.
Yeah.
Preferences, and I call it resonance engineering. And it's all about actually finding the best ways to communicate with the audience in terms of the way they'll receive the information and be able to digest it. So not just have it coming towards them, but actually for it to sink in, get into their memories, if that's the objective, and to be able to use it actively.
Yeah, active listening as well, isn't it? How you get someone engaged in that active listening.
Yes,
Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about the seven power presenting protocols if that's all right in a bit as well. I'm really interested in these. But when you start engaging with teams, what is the one of the most common mistakes that you see? When I say mistake, it's probably not a mistake, is it? It's more of a learning point. But what is the most
yeah,
common things that you see?
it actually changes from country to country. For
Interesting.
instance, in the UK, it's perhaps more that engineers are a bit reticent about getting out in front of people. I don't think it's a fear of speaking in public. A lot of people say, "Oh, number one fear is speaking in public." Generally speaking, what I find is when I scratch below the surface a bit, it's actually a fear of being in front of a group of people ill prepared. And if an engineer or other technical professional can feel confident because they've got the clarity of a structure that lets them know what they're going to do and how they're going to do it, then they're going to be better prepared for that. And clarity and confidence go together. They're a little bit of a double act. But if I go to America, then people don't seem to have any problem in jumping out in front of people, but they just haven't got that awareness of dealing with the people on the on the receiving end. And so it's a slightly different set of problems or issues to resolve. But it all
Culture.
comes down to the same sets of things. It's just where the focus lies.
Yeah, it's almost like cultural, I suppose, cultural barriers as well in terms of, like you say, how they communicate. In
Yes, I mean, yeah, again, we're talking sweeping generalisations.
yeah, that is,
But in the good old US of A, there does seem to be a high level of self-confidence in people to kind of just get out and talk about things. But of course, having the confidence to get out doesn't mean that you're going to do it really well. It's a great start, but you're
yeah.
not too scared of that. Um, but it's like I said, there's different sets of issues to resolve in both cases, and of course, other places around the world, Asia as well. You find differences.
So your seven power presenting protocols. So they're
Yeah,
famous in the tech world. So which of those protocols do you think creates the biggest transformation in someone's skill set when adopted properly?
I would say it's funny because when I present them, I do a kind of condensed presentations for things like sales kickoffs and company offsites and things that go through all seven. And I've never found one protocol that resonated more than others because I have a survey afterwards, and one of the questions is which protocol resonated most with you, and there's virtually never one that stands out. People have different things, but I think personally it would be protocol number one, which is purpose, because the purpose of a presentation is like the rudder of the ship. If you don't think about the outcomes of a presentation, and of course, most people, when they're asked to do a presentation, they start hacking away on some PowerPoint slides or Keynote, Prezi, or whatever, without thinking deeply about what the outcome is going to be. And just as importantly, agreeing the outcome with all the interested parties. So, for instance, if somebody were to ask me to do a presentation these days, I'm going to have a good stab at what I think the outcomes should be by talking to the person that asked me. I call them the sponsor. So the person that asked me to do the presentation is a sponsor, whether that's a conference organizer, my contact in a particular company, or somebody I'm pairing with to do a presentation. But of course, more importantly, really, is the audience and making sure that there's a massive overlap between what you deliver and what the audience needs. We don't want to finish it and they're still out like this. And so I totally advocate talking to the audience well before you ever step out in front of them. Now, of course, that's not always possible. You might be speaking at a conference and you've got no idea who's going to show up. So in that case, you have to talk to the organisers and find out the types of people that are coming and the kind of things they're trying to achieve. But a lot of the times, especially in pre-sales, you might even know these people already, or at
Yeah,
least have a contact. And so you can slip over an email that says, look, I'm coming next Tuesday to do this demo or to have this meeting. I was thinking to cover A, B, and C, and particularly in C, I was going to do this and this. And let them come back and say, yeah, actually, that's perfect. Or, no, we don't really need that emphasis on C, but we do need to know a bit more about A. Go through that cycle. It's only a few emails backwards and forwards until
yeah,
the three of you, the presenter, the sponsor, and the audience, are totally agreed on the outcomes.
yeah.
And
It's simple, isn't it, when you think of it like that?
it is, but you also need to consider the levels of outcomes. So there's the simple outcomes of the presentation itself, which might be, to teach people the top 5 features of this new release of software. But actually, maybe the sponsor who asks you to deliver this presentation is actually the head of tech support, and their objective is actually to reduce the number of tech support calls to make sure that your training's so good that their workload goes down. So there's the presentation objectives, there's the macro level objectives, the wider context. And the other thing that I teach people is you might have some personal objectives in this. It may be you want to show up as the company AI expert, or maybe you're looking for another job and at this conference you really want to shine in the way that other people come up to you afterwards and say, I really like what you did for your company A. We're looking for somebody in company B. Now, it's down to individuals how they handle this, and that shouldn't derail everything else. The
No.
first two come first, but just considering these things, because that's much deeper, isn't it, than just hacking on some PowerPoint slides. that
Yeah.
Mary down the corridor gave you, and you just change the company logo, move a couple around, Bob's your uncle, Fanny's your aunt, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's so simple when you think about it. I mean, like I said, a part of my role is I present, but I also do meetings. I've literally just been to a face-to-face meeting, which is quite rare nowadays. And first thing, we both said was, so what do you want to get out of this meeting today? And it's just simple, isn't it, about verbalizing. The whole point of this is for everyone to benefit in some way. So clearing that up in the beginning can really help the direction. People talk with confidence as well when they know what they're trying to achieve.
Yes, and
So
that's part of the point of trying to talk to people ahead of time if possible, so you
yeah,
get an idea of these things and potentially agree them totally before you get there. And so how that translates to actually stepping out in front of an audience that you've never been able to meet is you've got your agenda or what you're trying to achieve, the outcomes as opposed to the agenda. So if I'm at a conference, I'll pop up the outcomes that I've agreed with the conference organisers and say, look, this is what I've got in place. How's that? And I'll let people, and 99% of the time people plod nightly and, sorry, people nod politely and
yeah,
say, yeah, that looks good. But even if somebody said, actually, I'm not sure whether we really need this bit on the end, depends on the size of the audience. I might say, oh, Jim says we don't need this bit on the end. What's everybody else think? And if everybody else goes, yeah, he's right, we don't need it, I'd go with that on the fly.
yeah, totally. And so the way in which the audience perceives the information. So, like we just spoke about there, can be completely different in how people see what you're saying, absorb your information. What is a few ways that someone who's presenting could learn to adapt to some of those preferences?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Mm.
The first thing is to have an idea of how you sort of categorize those preferences. And of course, people have gone into neuro-linguistic programming. They might talk about visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. I use a very simple method. What I do is I use a real-life example when I'm teaching this to people. And I say, imagine if the organisers of this conference or this offsite or whatever, they're so kind, they're going to give you all a brand new coffee machine, one of those bean to cup things that you put on the
Yeah,
counter, put
I'll
the
be
coffee.
there.
I say, yeah, it's amazing, and you can connect the water and everything. And I say, generally speaking, there's three types of reaction to when this comes in. Some people are going to just rip it out of the box, plug it in, get going with it, and see what happens. And of course, most engineers will go, actually, that's me. I love doing that. But there'll always, without exception, be people, and I'll say other people, of course, will want to carefully open the box with a box cutter that they keep for just such occasions.
Yeah,
And then they're going to carefully unwrap the manual. Then they're going to sit in their favourite chair and read the manual cover to cover before they go anywhere near the coffee machine. And there is always at least one of those. Not in the majority, but there's always at least one, sometimes more. And I just make the point that that's not the wrong answer. There's no wrong answers. It just shows that different people prefer to learn to do things in different ways. And then we have a little bit of fun. I say, of course, there are some people that are going to want to neither start playing with it nor read the manual. They're going to sit back in a comfy chair and consider their previous relationships with coffee machines and what they got from them and what they'd like to get out of the relationship with the new coffee machine. And if these people also want to involve a flip chart when doing it, they're probably from HR. So we have a chuckle. We have a chuckle about that. But the point I'm making is some people are action led. This is the sort of simple categorization. Some people learn by doing. Other people want some input first. They want to read the manual, receive some slides and some input before they do it. And other people are more reflective. And then what I talk about is the clash. If you're an engineer and you learn by doing, you think, right, what I'll do is I'll get over there, I'll put the mouse in their hands, I'll get them, because they'll learn by doing. You're not really having that thought process that says, well, I learn by doing, I wonder what my audience like
yeah,
best. And if you think, oh yes, a bunch of engineers and they probably all like learning by doing, you can make that assumption. But if you don't know, then what you do is you'd build different elements in to actually please the input orientated people and please the action orientated people. And you could
yeah,
even have a little bit of a flip chart session about, what's the most important thing about this software to you? Let's just think about these things, and that might be more reflective before you got into it. So there's different ways to do things, and it's just a case of considering the differences between ourselves and other people and how we can serve them best.
Yeah, and it's too easy, isn't it, to just fall into the whole right. I've got to do a presentation. I'll put these slides together. I'm done. It's done. My job's done, and not
Yes,
thinking then about the next part of the presentation is, i.e., what you want to get out of it as an individual as well
yes,
as
exactly. And in fact,
presenting.
that what we just covered about thinking about the other ways that people accept information, or it is the third protocol. That's preferences, and between purpose at the beginning and preferences as the third one, the one that's in the middle is plan, which is all about a structure of a presentation that actually gets things into people's minds and takes advantage of the human attention span and the way people recall things from memory. And again, if all you're doing is hacking on PowerPoint slides, you're not having any of these thought processes at all.
No.
And one of the most terrible things I see is when a presentation finishes on questions and answers, Q&A. That's just an awful, terrible, terrible thing.
I'll write that down.
Yeah. Now, there's nothing wrong with handling people's questions, and you need to.
Yeah.
But when you consider the beginning and end of everything is what we tend to remember. So if you think about the most recent film you've watched, you remember the beginning, the opening sequence. You
Yeah.
remember the way it ended. You don't necessarily remember everything in between. When you think about your last job, you remember your first day on that last job, the last day on that last job. You don't remember every day in between. As another example, when you watch TV, the first advert and the last advert in an ad break are more expensive than the rest. And do you remember there's certain people, this is going back a bit, you're probably too young for this, Sarah,
I
but there
bet
was a
not.
time when it was either Nescafe or Gold Blend used to buy the first advert and the last advert, and they'd had this, thing going on between them. And it's because we tend to remember first and last, or the technical terms,
The story,
primacy.
wasn't it? There was a story
Yeah,
between
that's
them.
right.
The man and the
That, yeah,
woman
well,
in the flat.
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
well, so
I
they were using
digress.
the first and last, and they were
Yeah.
using a story, and of course, storytelling is very in vogue, and that's an important tool. However, storytelling is part of the media, if you like, and some people focus on that media. You need to be able to tell a good story, but they don't actually concentrate on the actual transmission. The link, like the Wi-Fi link or the Ethernet between people. And if you haven't got that, you could tell the best story in the world. But if you
Yeah.
haven't, if you're not able to communicate it properly, then it could be wasted. But just coming back to plan and Q&A very quickly, I'd just like to share an example. I was in San Francisco roughly this time last year at it was specifically a pre-sales um, conference day. Salesforce were there, OpenAI were there. There was quite a number of big companies, and Salesforce gave the opening keynote, and OpenAI, the Chat GPT people, they gave the closing keynote. And both these companies obviously spent a lot of money on slideware and getting everything right and so on. And the closing keynote came, and it was a guy from OpenAI, and he, did very, very reasonable job of the presentation, but he effectively finished this whole thing by saying, "That's it. Any questions?" That was the way he stopped. And the very first question was somebody who put their hand up and said, "Yeah, I'm trying to integrate my very, very obscure thing that I constructed myself with one of your APIs, and it doesn't quite work. I'm a bit concerned about this." And of course, being a techie geek, he got into that conversation, and now there's 199 people watching this left field thing unfold that's totally irrelevant to them. And so my thing about Q&A is the end of a presentation is the most important thing for call to action, next steps, the thought you want to leave people with. And so why would you squander that on something that you're not fully in control of? And so when I finish a presentation, I'll say, look, that's the end of the main body of what I wanted to talk about. So before I summarize or before I make the main points, what questions have you got? And then, of course, when that's over, and of course, sometimes there's no questions. And if it's right at the end and you've finished, then it's a bit embarrassing, isn't it? And you have to use a phrase, or people use phrases like, "Oh, I must have covered everything really well then," if there's no questions. But if you said, it's going to come back to me afterwards, you can say, "Oh, great, okay. Well, look, if you want to come and talk to me privately afterwards, that's fine. But now let's just go through those main points again, or let's just see what the next steps
Yeah.
are." And then you've got a good hard ending to the presentation that people can walk away with.
It's that value as well, isn't it? The whole point of everything right now, the world is, looking for how they get best value from things. And I think if you're giving people that value in this whole point of you just sitting here, the value behind that was these points for you to take away. It helps
Yes,
support, the fact that you're delivering the information you're trying to get across.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, Sarah, because giving value is absolutely key, and it's helpful to program engineers and other technical professionals to be outward focused about the value they're giving rather than inward focused about, oh, they're going to worry about what I'm wearing or what I look like or how I walk out in front of people. And so the minute you think, we all want to help people, don't we? And if we don't, why are we in pre-sales or the roles we're in? And so just changing that focus from internal, about a bit concerned about what people think of me, to external, about it's all about giving value, that's a fundamental change that helps everything else.
Yeah, and I work in sales, so it's a common narrative flip as well for us who's approaching someone to look at how we can support them, is to why am I connecting with you? What value am I bringing you right now? Why would you want
Mm.
to be sat here? And
Yes.
that plays into this presentation skill as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
I think,
absolutely. Asking questions. I mean, if you go and see a doctor, the doctor doesn't start by saying, look, I became a doctor in 1985. I studied here, here, and here. My specialisms about. I had a success story with Mrs. Brown the other day. You know, I was able to actually totally relieve her headache on the first visit. They ask
yeah,
you questions, don't they? And for as long as a doctor asks you questions, you're in the driving seat. You can say whatever you want, and the doctor's not wrong because they're asking you. So if you come and start a presentation about, we've got 3 sites throughout the UK, we've been doing this for 30 years, and all that sort of thing, that's totally boring because people really don't care how much you know until they know how much you care about them. And the way you demonstrate how much you care about them is asking what their frustrations are, what they want to achieve, and so on.
yeah, you're entirely right. I think one of the ways that was I wanted to talk to you about was this whole rehearsing of presentations, and think talking out loud, and that people underestimate the power, I think, of doing that. But do you think that that's something that people should be doing more
Totally.
of?
And actually, you've led us on to protocol number 4, practice. Or as I alternatively refer to it, reliability engineering. Because what we don't want to do is we don't want to leave it to chance whether we're having a good day or a bad day, or maybe the train was late and we're a bit stressed out. If we've practiced a presentation, particularly given what I was saying about the plan and the beginning and the ending, if we've practiced the beginning and the ending so fiercely that it's all not on autopilot in a bad way, but it comes to us so naturally. So when we step out in front of people, whether it's the beginning of a meeting or a presentation, and by the way, just a little mini story in here. I gave these £7 presenting protocols to Bloomberg, the financial information company, big old company in America, and I flew to New York and gave them in the context of them making presentations. But one of the guys came up to me afterwards and said, I can use precisely that in running meetings. I can use precisely those 7 principles of
Yeah,
communication really in doing one-to-one feedback because it actually works for everything. And so these things apply equally to whether it's a meeting or whether it's a presentation. But practicing for meetings is also important. Now, you might not verbalize everything, but you should surely look at the agenda and how that flows. But coming back to your question about practicing, yes, out loud is incredibly important because here's a stereotypical geek practice. They're rattling through their slides thinking about what they might say the night before, the flight before, or if it's a Zoom call, the minute before they're actually on. And of
yeah,
course, looking through your
yeah,
slides and trying to think about what you'll say is not the same as saying it out loud. Because when you say it out loud, you find out words that you stumble over, phrases that you thought were really cool and they sound completely pants once they're in the context of your presentation.
yeah,
And of course, very importantly, if you're in a multi-presenter environment like a conference or an off-site or whatever, you find out the timing of your presentation, or roughly. And so, yeah, practicing out loud is incredibly important, and there's no excuse not to. Ideally, you'll do it to colleagues that know what you're talking about and can give you feedback on both the content and the delivery. But then there's friends and family who can certainly give you feedback on the delivery if not the content. And sometimes having people that don't know what you're talking about is great, isn't it, on the content? Because they say, I'm not sure what you really meant there, and it can help you kind of iron things out. But there's no excuse, because if you can't find colleagues or friends and family, everybody's got a mobile phone with a voice and video recorder. And you could even pop it on a tripod these days if you wanted to. So there's no excuse for not practicing out loud. And I recommend practicing out loud at least 3 times, but really focusing on the beginning and ending. But one other thing I'd like to say about that, Sarah, is practice doesn't happen. You don't go purpose, plan, preferences, practice, and it's finished, and you're practice, 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 the same thing. Practice is part of the process of refining the presentation. So, as you're going through it, you're engineering the reliability of this delivery, then you're actually evolving the presentation. It's getting better.
Totally honing it.
Yes, and the other thing to say is that any presentation that's worth giving, and if it's not worth giving, why are you giving it? But any presentation that's worth giving is
Value
worth
again,
giving.
isn't it?
Yeah, it's worth giving it badly until you can give it well. And the giving it badly is in the practice part, and the giving it well is in front of a target audience.
I think that also helps with the audience and how they perceive the information. If you're using different people on those practice runs, like you
Yes,
say, you're constantly looking at how those people can, and their feedback is really helpful for that.
yeah, yeah,
I'm terrible though.
absolutely.
I'm one of these people that kind of I do practice obviously, but I'm also someone that works best on the fly. So I'm someone that has to make sure I really do that and make sure I practice. So
But yeah,
I suppose, how do you deal with the people like me?
but the two actually go hand in hand, don't they? Because working off the fly is the best thing to give value to your audience. But if you don't know your presentation particularly well and the subject areas in it, you can't respond on the fly as well as somebody that has.
Yeah,
And a classic example is when somebody asks you a question that's actually coming up, 10 minutes later in the presentation. And you can respond to that and go, yeah, actually, well, the answer is this. But I'm going to come on to that in more detail, in about 10 minutes' time. Would that be all right? Or do you really want to do it now? And if you're that practiced, you know that if you type 29 and hit enter, it will jump to the right slide, exactly what they're talking about, and you can do that. And so, yeah, being able to adapt is a key skill, and it actually is improved by practicing rather than practicing negating it. The one other thing is, in terms of giving value, people are looking to you for confidence. Now, if you
yes,
come out and you're not confident, they're now going to question the value, even though you might have said the right things about what you're trying to achieve. If you're umming and erring and not entirely sure, it actually transmits subconsciously a bad message to them. And one of the things that happens when people don't practice is they generally deliver something too fast. They go, blah, blah,
right.
blah, blah, they're right through it. Now, there's nothing wrong with that in terms of transmitting information, because I'm sure, like many other people, you perhaps listen to voicemails at
Yep.
1.5 speed, or you watch YouTube videos at 1.25. So we're used to speeding things up. So the information will actually come through, unless, of course, you're dealing with an audience whose language is different to yours. In which case, if you speak too fast, everything's lost. But the most important thing is the subconscious message, and the subconscious message that comes through when people speak way too fast is, I want to get this out the way. I don't really like being here, so I'm going to
Impatience.
rattle
Yeah.
through it. Yeah, exactly. And so really we should be conscious of the speed of delivery, and that comes from practice.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it? Because sales, well, I'm probably going to generalize this, but a lot of salespeople are quite impatient, and that hunger feeds them. So I suppose this is a mix of the two. I have to slow myself down. I have to do it quite regularly. So it's a mix of the two, isn't it? Almost. It's like making sure you're
Y-
delivering with confidence and value, but also making sure that you're delivering clearly and calmly.
Yes, but the very
Um,
fact that you have that thought process that says, "Do I need to slow down?" shows that you're thinking about these things. It's a little bit like driving a car. When you learn to drive a car, you're driving along,
yeah.
and the instructor says, "Oh, it's time to change gear." So you go to change gear, and you don't swerve off the road, but you do sort of wiggle a little bit, because you can't focus
Yeah.
on doing the two things at once. Well, speaking and presenting and even having thought processes in meetings is a bit like that. And the more you do it, the more you're able to think about other things. So you can be presenting, you be giving, and you can have that thought process that says, "Am I going too fast?" Or bit of advanced stuff. Do I need to speed up now to add to the excitement or the intrigue? Do I need to slow down and deepen my voice to, help everybody realise that I'm a safe pair of hands dealing with this particular subject? Nothing is going to go wrong, and to modulate your pitch of your voice, the pace of your delivery, and maybe where you're going to introduce pauses to let everything really sink in and for people to reflect on what you've just said.
Yeah, it's an art, isn't it? But like you say, with
Sure.
practice, it becomes one that's ingrained
Yes, and,
in
and,
you.
and everybody, it doesn't matter whether they're a specialist in your subject area or not, i.e., friends and family, they can say, "David, you're going way too fast. I can hardly
Yeah.
keep up with you."
Well, you mentioned AI earlier, which is funny because I just wanted to touch on that. It's absolutely obviously everyone's mentioning AI,
Yes.
dominating everywhere right now. Um, and obviously part of pre-sales preparation is AI. I can imagine is where a lot of people start in building those decks and information.
Yeah.
Um, so how can pre-sales and technical presenters, how can they start there but make it human at the same time?
Yeah, that, that
Do you
that's a great question. And as techies, we love to get in and use all these tools and facilities. And you're quite right. By using AI as a starting point, like, it could be, I'm going to visit the HR team of company A to sell them software as a service or whatever. Tell me what the most important things are going to be, or trawl their website and find out what their this year's company objectives are or values. All that sort of stuff is fine. Where we go wrong, or where techies can go wrong, is they can say, "Oh, I've seen that Gamma can create a complete slide deck for me. All I have to do is tap in a few lines and it'll pop it in."
Yeah.
And already people are getting very, very competent at spotting AI slop and not
Yes.
liking it. And so it's a real turn off to people. And so my advice to technical people is to use AI to help their human connection.
Yep.
As an
Enhance it.
example, yes, as
Hmm.
an example, the very next protocol after practice is participation. And it's all about helping people to be fully involved in the presentation rather than the engineer stepping out and doing it to you. We're actually going to have a conversation, and the engineer is going to be so good at this that they're going to involve the audience in participation, shows of hands, questions. Sarah, I think you've got a story about that, haven't you? Can you tell us what happened when you went to deploy this particular software on site at this company? That level of participation is very, very important because what we're looking for is engagement, isn't it?
Yes.
We're looking for the connection with our audience to be so good that they're really happy to ask questions anytime, and they're treating us more like a trusted advisor and an old friend than somebody that's come there to give a presentation. And so what you can do is you can talk to AI and say, "Look, I'm doing this presentation. Can you tell me 5 different ways I could really involve people in what I'm doing? Beyond questions and answers, what other things?" And might come back and say, "Well, actually, have you considered doing this short 3-question quiz near the
Yeah.
beginning to highlight what the most important things are?" Using AI to help your human connectivity is the trick, not to generate content that you then try and learn and regurgitate, because that's just not going to help. You
No,
can use it,
exactly.
yeah. So it's ideation and thinking about the human connection rather than content is the way that I would teach it. It's just an overall principle.
Yeah, and that principle fits, I think, quite a lot of areas when it comes to AI, doesn't it? Embracing it and using it to enhance and actually add value to you
Yeah,
seems to be the way that it needs to be thought about, I think. And so, with like, what communication skills do you think are going to be the most valuable over the next few years for professionals that are navigating this AI transformation?
it's going to be human to human connectivity, because with AI and with all of the tools we now have, lots of people can find themselves going through a process of buying without meeting somebody.
Yeah,
And of course, on at the smaller end, of a lower ticket end, you might totally complete it online and never meet anybody. But if you're going to spend £200,000 or 500,000 or whatever it is, you're going to meet somebody. But now, when you do meet, you've spent a lot more money before that meeting. You might have automated lots of stuff, but you've paid subscriptions for all kinds of different software. You know,
Yeah.
that meeting is more expensive than it used to be when you just rock up. And so, the ability to have good human to human connectivity is so important. And when we think about these power presenting protocols, those first five that we've just talked about, which were purpose, plan, preferences, practice, and participation, all of those have happened before you ever meet people. And the whole reason for that, you haven't stepped out in front of them yet, you haven't gone on stage or gone to the front of the room. The whole reason for those first five happening before that point is to give you the confidence that comes from the clarity of knowing what you're talking about. And you can use AI to inform that. So, just to give another AI example, if you're not totally sure of the learning preferences or the way people receive information, you say, look, I'm an engineer and I know for a fact that I like to learn by doing, but I'm going to see this bunch of accountants next week to sell them Workday or whatever it might be. Tell me more about the kind of learning preferences there might be in that audience. And
Yeah.
so, AI can help you analyze these things. So it's not giving you the content. You don't want it to give you the content, but it's helping you to understand the human connection. Now,
It's
what I'm
giving you
going to do,
tools, isn't it?
absolutely,
Yeah.
I'm going to, I'm going to say something that I normally say at the very end of a presentation, but it's very pertinent to what you were just saying about the most important skill, and in my view, it being the human to human connection. At the beginning of a presentation, sometimes I'll play a little bit of video of a football match, and just when it's getting to the really exciting part, when the guy's entered the box and he's about to kick the ball into the back of a net, you get the buffering symbol, and people think my presentation's gone wrong, but it's part of the presentation. And then I say, "Has this ever happened to you?" And of course, it's probably happened to just about everybody.
Yeah. All of us. Yeah.
And I say, "What's the problem?" And people will go, "Oh, bad Wi-Fi, this, that." They'll come up with all sorts of other things, but the group consensus is always it's a bad connection. It's a bad connection. And then I say, exactly. I say, how many presenters or people that are going to deliver demos or people that are going to run a meeting walk out without having a proper connection
Yeah.
with their audience? And we were talking about giving value. If you imagine if you've got a really tiny connection with your audience, it's very difficult for you to push all of that value down the channel, and of course, just as difficult for you to read the feedback that's coming back.
Yeah.
But if you've worked hard to build a really good connection, to have maximum bandwidth between you and your audience, then not only can your information flow so well to them, but you can read everything that's coming back, whether it's a little bit of skepticism, whether it's people who are
Hmm.
violently agreeing with you. You need that bandwidth. And actually, in human terms, that bandwidth is called rapport. And the reason I usually talk about this
Yeah.
at the very end is my 7 power presenting protocols. We've touched on the first 5. There's 2 more that also begin with a P. And when you slide them about, the word rapport comes straight down the middle. And what I say to people is actually everything we've talked about has been about establishing, building, growing rapport, because that is the human connection. And that's what it's all about. But can you imagine if you talked to a bunch of
Yeah.
engineers and said, I'm going to go through rapport building techniques with you? There'd be a real turn off. They'd suddenly remember a meeting that they've got to go to. But if you've given them a framework,
Yeah.
and a byproduct of that framework is that it actually does the thing that needs to be done, along with giving them all the confidence and everything, then you can see that that really helps with that human connectivity.
Yeah. It's so true. We just did a presentation to a smaller audience actually in one of our partnerships in London, and I was in my presenting section, and a chap just was had something a question on everything. Um, so I kind of like flipped it round and just said, I'm really interested actually in what in that bit you've just said there. Like, do you want to explain it some more? And it
Mm.
allowed me to also move on, if that makes
Yeah,
sense. But the rapport I then
yeah.
had with him meant that he didn't then constantly come back.
But what you did brilliantly there was turn somebody that could have been an annoyance into a resource. And
Yes.
in giving him the spotlight for a while, maybe because when people ask questions, It's not always a question. Sometimes it really is a genuine question, but sometimes it's a bit of a request for the spotlight because they know a lot about this or they've got a story about it. And, yeah, that doesn't need to be a bad thing. But by turning that person into a resource, you help them feel good, you stop them constantly interrupting you, and of course, you made them your buddy, and a bit later, you might have been able to come back to that person, when you were ready. So, that's a great tool. And that actually, that comes into the very next protocol, which is called performance. And
Yes.
that's about when you're out in front of people doing it, not only about using your voice and your body and projecting and all of that kind of stuff. This is connection engineering, if you like, but dealing with what other people might think of as awkward participants. But you demonstrated your professionalism there, in rather than getting annoyed by it, actually turning that person into a resource. And one of the things I often talk about, I'm not a martial artist. I've never done a day of karate or judo in my life. But I think one of the principles of judo is using your opponent's energy in the direction that you want to go. So, they lunge for you and you help
Yeah.
them lunge and go past you or whatever it is. And so I think that's part of the art of being a presenter, is taking the energy of people, even if it's not directed for good intent possibly, and helping it as part of your narrative. But of course, can you imagine, and maybe you did this, but if at the very beginning you've gone through the outcomes that you're looking to achieve and people have nodded and said, yeah, that's exactly it, then that person might be giving their input in the framework of those objectives, or it might be totally random because they just want a bit of airtime. And one of our skills is recognizing that and dealing with it appropriately. If it's a genuine question, that's a real question, you can just answer it and move on, can't you? But if you
Yeah.
perceive that it's not a genuine question,
No, it's exactly it, and I think that it's that whole almost connection before correction as well, isn't it? That you have
that's
to,
a great
if you want
phrase.
to be, yeah, you want to be able to correct someone, you do need to have a connection for them to take that correction with in the best way possible.
Again, it's all about the bandwidth, isn't it? It's all about that rapport that you have with the person. But it sounds like you did a really excellent job there. One
Thank
other,
you.
yeah, well done. One other very practical demonstration I do is I'll get somebody out of the audience and I put my hand up and I just say, just put your hand against mine, and they do. And then I push against their hand without giving them any instruction, and they always push back
Yeah.
because that's our natural thing. Is when things come our way, we tend to push back. And you could have, if you'd not been thinking about it, you could have pushed back on that guy and said, "Oh yeah,
Yeah.
thanks for answering that, asking that question, but you're totally wrong and you're out of context. Do you mind if I carry on?" That would have been a terrible thing to do, wouldn't it? But
Yeah.
you took it, and instead of pushing back, you went like this, and you used that energy. So that's really, it's a great example. I'm glad you brought it up.
Thank you. So what's your advice for those people specifically, the ones that struggle with the nerves or the confidence?
Yes, it is. In general, it's those first five protocols because they give clarity about everything that's going to happen. And from that clarity comes a degree of confidence. So I would say that if somebody says, "Yeah, I'm really nervous about about doing presentations," if they work through the first five protocols, I would say at least 70% of those nerves have disappeared already. But you're quite right, there's still that thing about getting out in front of people. And so the practice is absolutely key. The outward focus on the value that you're giving is absolutely key, and not thinking about what do I look like or how am I going to come across. Just focus on giving the value, and then just acknowledge that there's going to be nerves, and nerves are normal for things that we think are important. So if we're going for a job interview, if we're going to have a child, where we'd be concerned about whether that child's developing properly and going to be delivered, with everything that they should have. So we're often on edge about things, but they're important things. And so to use a book title, feel the fear, but do it anyway. Acknowledge that this is a bit of a frightening thing, but the only way we're going to grow is by pushing ourselves a little bit, isn't it? We don't have to jump a million
Yeah,
miles out of
totally.
our comfort zone, but we do need to push the envelope a little bit in order to stretch ourselves. And just like riding a bike, the more you do it, the better you get. And actually,
Yeah.
on that very thing, yeah, I'm going to come to a Duffett trademarked thing here, and that is
Go.
give presentations even when nobody's asked you to. So the context of trying to
Right.
get better at doing these things, think of ways that you could make a presentation when nobody ever asked you. I call it the art of the unsolicited presentation. So if you're in a job, where you may be called upon to make presentations or maybe not, but you notice that team A doesn't really understand what your team does, and you have a few insights that could help them, you can go to your boss and you say, have you noticed that team A doesn't really understand what we do? Now, if your boss says, I don't know what you're talking about, they know perfectly well, probably time to go and think about something else. But if your boss goes, do you know what, it's been like that for years, and I'm sure it's costing us money. If they only knew this, this, and this, you can say to your boss, well, why don't I do a lunch and learn? I'll put together like a 15, 20-minute presentation about the top 5 things they need to know about what we do. You get some pizzas,
Yeah.
and we'll have a little bit of a session. Now, in that way, you've put your head above the parapet, haven't you? You've offered to do a presentation, perhaps in a safer context. You're trying to give value. And of course, it won't do your reputation any harm at all by being the person that offered to give a presentation.
And do you think that's how leaders could kind of help to embed that presentation culture a bit more as well, is by accepting, more people will be able to do presentations. It's not just a because I've asked you for one kind of
Yes,
environment.
they should thoroughly encourage it. And one of the ways they should thoroughly encourage it is been by being great presenters themselves.
Yeah.
Often the difference between a really good network engineer and a CTO is that communications piece, because companies recognise that if you're going to get into the C-suite, you need to have a certain level of gravitas about you. You need to be able to, talk confidently to audiences and or groups of people and make presentations. And if you can make that, if you do that well, and you can encourage other people to do it, so as they look up to you, they think, yeah, I can see that communications is actually a very important part of this, then they can aspire to that. And of course, you should encourage it. So, although I said an unsolicited presentation, wouldn't it be great if the manager said, "Listen, I know that there's all sorts of things that go on in this company that I don't really know about, that don't bubble up to me every day, that might be making a significant difference to our operational efficiency. If you know about anything like that, and you'd be prepared to give a 10, 15-minute presentation, I've got this £50 Amazon voucher here."
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a bribe, but you know what I mean. So encourage it.
Yeah.
And one other thing on that, and that is that encouraging anything has to encapsulate not going mad about mistakes. I know this is a very cliched example that we use, but when you're teaching your child to walk and they fall over, you don't point at them and go, "Oh, you've made a massive mistake. You
Totally.
should never have done that. If you'd have put that foot differently, everything would have been better." You say, "No, come on, Billy, come on, Mary," and you encourage them, because making the mistakes is part of the learning process. And obviously, what you don't want to do is put someone who's going to make a load of mistakes out on the conference stage in a thought leadership position, but have them make some presentations, get them used to presenting inside the company in a lower stakes environment. That's a really good thing.
Yeah, totally. I think you've just also given me a really good idea there in terms of letting the rest of the team. We're a remote business, and sometimes I think I said this yesterday again. Um, that the rest of the team, we all work so well collaboratively together for a remote business, but we also maybe just don't understand quite what each other does, and that's going to be a really useful way for everyone to help understand that, I think. So I'm
Yeah,
going to get everyone practicing presentations now
yeah, a little
based
mini
on that.
presentation about what we do. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've coached thousands of presenters worldwide. Um, what do you wish that every pre-sales person understood about communication?
I think it starts with self-awareness,
Yeah.
because until you understand the way that you work, you won't have such an appreciation of the way other people work and be able to understand the comparison and the contrast, and build that in. And
Yeah.
so, if I could wave a magic wand, self awareness would be the number one thing. Of course, there's all sorts of golden nuggets and tools and techniques. We've talked through some of these, but I think the absolute guiding principle is sort of know yourself, and then you're in a better position to help everybody else. And in the art of presentations, that's all about communication skills, learning styles, and knowing where you are. You don't have to be the most outgoing person to make great presentations. Now, if there's time, I'll just give you a quick example of
Yeah,
this.
yeah, of course.
In this very telecom, no, in fact, it's another telecoms company where I'd used a presentation to get the job, where they'd not asked me for one. This was in Milton Keynes. I was asked to deliver presentation skills for a cross section of the whole company. So from the sales team through to the pre-sales, including the facilities manager, the guy that looked after making sure that the buildings were all in order. And because he used to have to give health and safety talks at inductions and things like that. His
Yeah.
name was Keith. He was a lovely, lovely man, and he's quite a funny guy, but he was not the stand up and get out in front of everybody kind of person. And bearing in mind about beginnings and endings, we worked together on a beginning that made really good use of his humour. But he came out in front of people, and he wasn't even comfortable standing up, so he sat on the edge of a desk that happened to be at the front of the room with his arms folded, sort of a bit of a tell that he wasn't entirely comfortable being there. And then he said, hands up if you'd like the afternoon off work. Load of hands went up, and he went, in hospital. Because that's where you're going to end up if you don't listen to my 10-minute health and safety talk.
Brilliant.
And so, it used a bit of humour. It didn't push him too far, and it did go down really well. And he had another one, and it was, how many people would like a free ride in an ambulance?
It's a great engagement though, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, he did a really good
Fantastic.
job.
And so finally, what is one common presentation myth that you could wish you could bust right now and stop people believing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it is, especially in technical circles, that you have to know everything. You have to know your stuff. You need to know something about your subject matter, but you don't have to be a total expert and know every nook and cranny. You and in doing that, and in owning up that you don't know, that's another confidence builder. To say, Sarah, that's a great question. First thing I do actually is say, Sarah, you ask the question, what do you think? And you'll say, actually, the answer is this, because maybe you were asking the
Yeah.
question to demonstrate your knowledge.
Yeah.
So, so you can answer it, but you can ask the person that asked the question, or you can say, well, Sarah's asked this question. What does everybody else think? And let other people answer it. But, or you can say, it's a good question. To be honest with you, I don't know the answer, but I can speak to tech support during the break and get that for you. And I'll come back, do you mind if I just jot it up on the flip chart as a reminder to myself and to us? And then after we come back from break, I'll give you answers. Is that okay? Nobody's going to shoot you, are they? Nobody's going to go mad.
No.
So, yeah, it would be, you don't need to know everything. And if you're teaching something, you don't need to be at the end of the race. You just need to be 1 foot or 1 metre or whatever in front. And so if your focus is helping people, then that will remove part of this, I must know everything. You're just trying to help the people where they are now and move them along.
Could not agree more. I think there's power in building that rapport further by being that person that is able to say, I'm not the right person for this question, but I can definitely make sure I get one who is.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
that
Because
helps
then,
to build
and
your credibility.
very much so. And in a sales situation, you're the trusted advisor now, aren't you? You're not the
Yeah,
person that's trying to prove you know everything. You're the person that absolutely wants the best for the people that you're talking to.
yeah, completely. And that's all everyone wants. Thank you so much, David. I've really, really enjoyed speaking with you. A lot of this resonates with me as well, which really helps. And I'll definitely be exploring some more of these power presenting protocols. But I'm hoping, if it's okay with you, we can put David's details up. So if they've got any questions at all, anyone's got any questions or wants to even look at how you can come along and help them with the power presenting protocols, it would be all right for us to put that out there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so if people want to find me, they can come there. There's a website called geekspeakhq.com, and
Yeah, we'll
there's the
put that up.
book Be the Nerd That's Heard. That goes through the 7 power presenting protocols as well as giving some information around it. Because if you're the nerd that's heard, you're probably also the nerd that's seen and recognised for doing a good job.
That's a great title. Yeah, we'll share that link as well with everyone. But thank you so much,
Yeah,
David.
in
Um,
fact, just for your viewers, Sarah, I'll send you a special discount link so they can get the book just
oh,
a better
amazing.
price than on Amazon.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you very much. But no,
You're
thanks for your
welcome.
time.
Been thoroughly enjoyable, and thank you.